tomorrow. All right. Bava Batra Kuftet Amud Bet. I apologize if under the weather. And it's a shame because this is such a good sugya. And I was excited to teach it, but I don't know. I'll try to power through it. It'll be tough though. Anyways, so this week we'll be discussing a Gemara which talks about Moshe Rabbeinu's grandson. Anyone know who Moshe Rabbeinu's grandson is?
Micha.
No.
The one that was in the Pesel Micha, no?
Yeah, he right. During Pesel Micha. Yeah?
You're talking about the one with the nun that was falling asleep.
Yeah, the nun Telu. Good. So we'll learn about the case of the nun Telu. Yeah. You'll understand shortly. There's an example of the story of Pesel Micha. We'll remind ourselves the end of Sefer Shoftim. A guy named Micha, he builds a Pesel, and he wants to find a Kohen, like a priest for his Pesel. So he finds some guy, and this guy, he's not a Kohen, but this guy comes and he says, "Yeah, I'll be your Kohen." And so Micha is very happy about it, and then people from Shevet Dan, they come and they basically grab this guy and force him to come be a Kohen for them instead. The people of Shevet Dan. Yeah, also for Avodah Zarah. Yeah. So it's a story at the end of Sefer Shoftim. And what we'll see is that this person's name is Yehonatan ben Gershom ben Menashe. Okay?
But the
nun of Menashe is very small and it's hanging. So the Midrash will say that that's actually Moshe, if you take out the nun, because Moshe is son in Gershon. So it attributes this Kohen for Avodah Zarah to be the grandson of Moshe Rabbeinu.
The reason you have the nun, so it won't be embarrassing for him.
Good. Excellent. So we're going to read that inside. What we're going to try to develop is why the Midrash is saying this, and then I'll try to offer a chidush at the end, which is quite fantastical, but I think is also a very it's an added chidush on top of what the Midrash is already trying to say. Okay, so we won't be looking at Mefarshim this week because there's just a lot of really good Midrashim, except for Rashi at the end, but Baktana. So let's get started. Okay, so the Gemara in Bava Batra and Kuften Amud Bet says as follows. The context in Bava Batra is about Yerusha, inheritance. So it's discussing Bnot Tzlofchad and all the questions around the son and the daughter and all the questions about the inheritance. And at one point, it asks the halachic question, Mishpachat em eina kura mishpacha. It says only a father's house is considered mishpacha in that halachic discussion. But then the Gemara says, Mishpachat em eina kura mishpacha. Is it true that a mother's family is not considered a mishpoche? The הכתוב, doesn't it say, ויהי נער מבית לחם יהודה, ממשפחת יהודה, there was a young man from Beit Lechem, from the family of Yehuda, והוא Levi, and he was a Levi, והוא גר שם, and he lived there. This is talking about that priest that we were discussing. This is how he's introduced.
Also, if you say the גר שם, it's already Gershon.
מעניין, יפה. That's not where it says it, but it says it in a different pasuk. But who gal sham is a nice added idea. I like that a lot. Very good. So the Gemara asks, Hagufa Kashi, this pasuk itself makes no sense. Amarta v'hu Levi, right? It says he's a Levi. Alma mi Leviati, right? If you say v'hu Levi, so what Shevet is he from? He's from Shevet Levi. But then you said right before that, mi mishpachat Yehuda. So Alma mi Yehudati. So which is it? Is he from Shevet Levi or Shevet Yehuda? So the Gemara says. So the Gemara says, "Ela lav davu milevi v'imei Yehuda." You have to say that one parent's from one shevet, one parent's from the other shevet. And since the whole discussion here is that he's from Shevet Levi, which is why he's allowed to be Micha is okay with him being a Kohen, so his father must have been from Levi. So doesn't that mean his mother's from Yehuda? And v'kamo mimishpachat Yehuda. So don't we see here a proof that you can say the mother's family is mishpacha, which is the whole proof we're trying to prove. And the answer is kind of funny actually. Amar Rava bar Rav Chanan la gavra d'shmei Levi. No, when it says "Vayinar mi beit lechem Yehuda mishpachat Yehuda v'hu Levi," it means he was from the family of Yehuda, and his name was Levi. Not that he was from the tribe of Levi. Okay, so the Gemara does not like this. It says, "I hachi hainu dekamar micha ata yadati ki yetiv Hashem li ki haya li halevi lekohen." So later, Micha is so happy that this person joins him to be the priest for Avodah Zarah. He says, "I know Hashem is dealing good with me because He made Halevi to be my Kohen." So doesn't that show that he was from Shevet Levi? No, No, Micha was saying, now I know that Hashem is doing good with me because He made my Kohen somebody named Levi. Okay, so that's the Gemara's. The Gemara says, no, ein achinami.
Tried to kid himself that he wasn't doing Avodah Zarah.
Who, Micha?
Yeah.
It's a good question. I think it's outside the scope here.
Saying fine.
Okay. Yeah, no, right. It's a bit off topic. Yeah. Well, why is he referring to Hashem when he's building an idol? It's a good question. Yeah. It's yeah. V'chi Levi Shmo, but was his name actually Levi? V'halo Yehonatan Shmo, but we know his name was Yonatan. So how can you say his name was Levi? Shneimar, it says later on in the story. This is the key pasuk. V'Yonatan ben Gershom ben Menashe, hu vanav v'yu kohanim l'shevet Adani. Okay, so this is after Shevet Dan came and kind of took him away and made him their kohen. So there, later in the parak, it references his name as Yonatan ben Gershom ben Menashe. So we know his name is Yonatan. What do you tell me his name is Levi? And then the question is, V'chi ben Menashe hu, v'alo ben Moshe hu, right? He was the son of Moshe. Dichtiv uvnei Moshe Gershom Eliezer. We know Moshe the son of Gershom. Ela מתוך שעשה מעשה מנשה, תלאו הכתוב במנשה. So why does it say that he's Yonatan ben Gershom ben Menashe? So here it doesn't reference what Kobe was saying about the Nun Tluya. We'll see that shortly in a different midrash. Here it says it doesn't call him the son of Moshe, but rather Menashe, to attribute to him Menashe, because Menashe was a wicked king. He was a Rasha, one of the worst kings. So you say
later,
right? Good, very good. So the Moshe, I didn't bring it. The Moshe says Menashe lived hundreds of years later, but Beseder, the Tanakh is now telling us that the king that will live hundreds of years later did awful things. So it attributes to this person who lived way earlier the deeds of that much later Rasha king.
אבל למה נחסים את זה דווקא? יכול להיות עוד יונתן בן גרשום. הוא היחיד בעולם שהוא...
יפה, אז אני מקווה שאנחנו נענה את זה. כאילו יש פה איזושהי מטרה מאחורי המדרש הזה, נדבר על זה. ברור שלפי הפשט זה המצב, כן? כאילו, על פי פשוטו, it's a different person, אבל המדרש מאוד רוצה שזה יהיה הנכד של משה, ונדבר על למה. Okay?
So, by the way, we saw it, I think, I don't know exactly which pasha, but we see it also back when somebody, I don't know, is doing a very big sin, they go all the way to Mishpachat Dan, as we see in Korach.
Okay, good.
So I guess it probably went specifically to Menashe and Moshe because that was the biggest one.
יופי, ברוך שכיוונת. So we're going to bring that midrash later. Very good. Excellent.
And a few weeks
Yeah,
ago
video.
and a few weeks ago that Moshe's sons were in Tzaddikim.
Good. Excellent. That's part of the answer. We're getting to that, right? Okay, you're all alluding to keys to the puzzle. Okay, good. So here we say that he's attributed to be a descendant of Menashe, even though he wasn't actually, to show that he did bad things, okay? So it says then, Hachanami, מתוך שעשה מעשה מנשה דעתי מיהודה, תלאו כתוב ביהודה. So now it says, when it calls him ממשפחת יהודה, this is even more radical, because it's saying, that means Menashe, even though Yehuda was righteous. But it's saying, like, from the family of Yehuda, meaning Menashe, who didn't even live for hundreds of years. No, it's going, just going like this to try to show that this person was a descendant of Moshe Rabbeinu, okay? So it continues and says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Mikan shetolin et hakalkala b'mekulkal. We attribute bad things to people who do bad things, right? So you attribute to this Yonatan the name of Menashe, okay? Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina Amar mehacha. Another proof for that idea. V'gam hu tov to'ar me'od, ve'oto yalda achrei Avshalom. It's talking about Adoniah, who was one of the sons of David HaMelech, who rebelled against David HaMelech. And it says Adoniah was born after Avshalom. And it says, and it implies it's the same mother. But we know that they had different mothers, Avshalom and Adoniah. So why does it say Oto Yalda? מתוך שעשה מעשה אבשלום דמרד במלכות תלאו כתוב באבשלום. Rather, they didn't actually have the same mother, but it connects him to Avshalom because he did a similar act of wickedness and rebelled against the king. החנמי, מתוך שעשה מעשה מנשה תלאו הכתוב במנשה. Okay? Let's continue. Amar Rabbi Elazar, L'olam yidbak adam b'tovim. A person should always marry into a good yichus. How do we know this? She'arei Moshe shenasa bat Yitro yatsa mimenu Yonatan. Moshe Rabbeinu married Tzipora, right? Who was not good yichus, and so his grandson was Yonatan, this wicked priest for Avodah Zarah. But his brother Aaron shenasa bat Aminadav, right? Elisheva was Aminadav's daughter, the sister of Achshon. Yatsa mimenu Pinchas. Aaron's grandson was Pinchas. Okay, so Pinchas and Yonatan, because they married good yichus and not good yichus. But then the Gemara, we can actually skip this next part just in the interest of time, and go to the third section here. Vaysu shama vayomer mi yavecha halom u'ma ata oseh bazeh u'ma lecha po. This is a question that Shevet Dan asked Yehonatan. So they said to Yehonatan, who brought you here? What are you doing here? And what purpose are you here for? So the Midrash says, Amulo, Lav mi Moshe Katid. Don't you, Yonatan, aren't you the grandson of Moshe Rabbeinu? Tichtiv be atikav halom. So when it says mi yevecha halom, it's like when Hashem said to Moshe at the burning bush, atikav halom. So the Midrash is saying, aren't you the grandson of the one who is halom? Lav mi Moshe Katid tichtiv be maze biadcha. We're talking about the staff. So aren't you the one that's a ma'ata oseh bazeh? Velav mi Moshe Katid tichtiv v'ata po amudi modi ma lecha po. In other words, it's like Shevet Adan they can't understand why this Yehonatan is doing Avodah Zarah. You're the grandson of Moshe Rabbeinu. What's going on? Okay, so Ta'aseh Komer Avodah Zarah. That's you're going to be a priest for Avodah Zarah. So what was Yonatan's answer? Amar lehen kach mekublani mi beit avi Abba. I have a tradition from my grandfather's house. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu. Leolam yaskir adam atzmo Avodah Zarah v'al yitztach lebriot. It's better to work and worship do work for Avodah Zarah than be mitzvah lebriot, than to need charity. It's better to make a living, even if the living is avodah zarah, than to be mitzvah lebriot. No, he's saying, I'm just trying to make a living. Like what am I supposed to do? And the Gemara says, "Hu savar avodah zarah mamash." He thought this teaching meant that you could actually be in the service of avodah zarah. Velohi, but that's not true. El avodah zarah, avodah shezara lo. The teaching was actually, you're allowed to avoid needing charity to do work that is foreign to you. Not avodah zarah, but something that is beneath you, quote unquote. For example, Kedamar leRav l'Rav Kahana, Rav said to Rav Kahana, Netosh nevelta b'shuka u'shgol agra, v'la'atei magav rabba ana v'zila b'milta. So Rav said to Rav Kahana, go to the shuk, right, and sell carcasses, and then, take your earnings from the carcasses that you sold. Don't say, oh, I'm a great Rav, I'm a gadol hador, and this work is beneath me. In other words, it's always better to make an honest living, even if the work is, very unsavory work, than to need to be reliant on charity. But not that you can do avodah zarah, be in the service of avodah zarah. Okay. Then the Midrash ends. Kevan shira David shemamon chaviv alav biyoter. David saw that this Yehonatan loved money. No, that's why he was doing this. So minaw al otzarot. David HaMelech appointed him over the storehouses of the royal palace. Shnema ushvuel ben Gershom ben Menashe nagid al otzarot. It says in Divrei Yamim, and it switches the name from, instead of Gershom and Menashe, it switches it to be Shvuel instead of Yonatan. So what is Shvuel? Shvuel Shmuel, lo Yonatan Shmuel, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Sheshav lakel b'chol libo. Notice that he did tshuva. Why did he do tshuva? Because once he had a steady job, through being appointed over the storehouses of David HaMelech in the royal palace, so then he was able to return to Hashem. That was the only reason why he was worshiping Avodah Zarah, was not because he believed in it, but because he needed it in order to make a living. Once David HaMelech gave him an honest living, so then he returned to Hashem b'chol libo, and so the pasuk calls him Shvuel. Okay, so this is the midrash about Moshe Rabbeinu's grandson Yonatan. A lot of really interesting points here. I'll just point out before we go to the next. There's two other versions of the midrash that we're going to look at. You'll notice the differences, but it says here David. Now, when did David HaMelech live? Right.
That's also a lot later.
Right. Because David HaMelech lived hundreds of years later. Okay? And it depends when you place the story of Pesel Micha, which we're going to talk about. But certainly Moshe Rabbeinu, right, his son and ostensibly his grandson were alive in the time of Yoshua. So you're talking about hundreds of years later. Okay? So we'll talk about that. If we look in Shir Shem Rabbah, it says the following: Nichnas Rabbi Meir v'darash, v'navi achad zaken yoshev b'veit el, ve'eze zeh amatzia kohen beit el. There's a story, I don't have time to go into the story, but it's a crazy story in Melachim Aleph, in the days of Yeravam ben Nevat. I mean, we may have learned the story. It's in the Psukim. It's the story of a Navi that goes to Yeravam ben Nevat and tells him, you're a big Rasha and all these terrible things are going to happen to you, this and that. And then on the way home, a man comes to this Navi and says to him, come eat with me. You have a long journey back home. And the man says, I'm not allowed to eat with you. I'm a Navi, and Hashem told me, don't stop on your way back home. So the second person says, I'm also Navi, and Hashem told me that you should come eat with me. So the first Navi says, okay, well, if you're a Navi and Hashem told you that, I guess then I'm allowed to come eat with you. So the Navi goes and eats with him, and then the second person, who was lying, it's not clear why he was lying, he gets a real Nevuah, and the real Nevuah, he then tells to the first Navi, and says, because you went with me, even though you weren't supposed to, when you leave my house, a lion is going to eat you. Okay?
A what?
He said the first
A
Navi
lion.
was fake, I was lying, but now, trust me,
But now I'm a real
trust
Navi.
me, I'm a real Navi.
Right. So then the first Navi finishes eating and leaves, and a lion comes and eats him. The second person, who is now a real Navi, sees his carcass in the ground, and he says to his family, I want to be buried with that real Navi, because he was just doing what he thought was right. The whole story is very, very strange. It's in Melachim Aleph, Perek Yud Gimel, I think. But the reason why I'm bringing it up is that you have a story about this person who's a Navi Sheker who turns into a real Navi within the story. Okay? So Rabbi Meir says, who was that person? Amatzia Kohen Beit El. We're not going to talk about who that is. Amar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, Meir pitputei beitzim yeshkan. So Rabbi Yossi says, Meir, you have like eggshells here, pieces of eggs. I think it's an insult. He's saying like, your midrash is nonsense. Okay. So who was this person? Ezez Yonatan ben Gershom ben Moshe. This person was Moshe's grandson, Yonatan. How do lichtiv Yonatan ben Gershom ben Menashe? Nun tluya ben Menashe. This is what Kobe was saying. That the nun of Menashe is hanging. To teach me it's Moshe. Why? Zacha ben Moshe v'imlav ben Menashe. Right? If he had acted properly, he would have been called ben Moshe. But because if you act improperly, you're attributed to ben Menashe. It's not in this. It's only in the Tanakh. And then the Midrash says, Kevan shemet David, when David HaMelech died, Chazar lesuro, he returned to being a Rasha. Hadu dichtiv, vayomer lo gam ani navi kamocha v'chule, kichesh lo. Right? That it's saying this person was a Navi Sheker, that this was Yonatan, and that he lied. Ma'u kichesh lo shiker lo. Ma shiker lo, echala lo lechem ksavim, uchtiv, vahiyem yoshvim ashulchan v'idvar Hashem al-Navi, asher yeshivo, etc. In other words, what's the story now? We add another piece to this. This Yehonatan was a Komer, a priest of Avodah Zarah in the days of Micha. Then in the days of David HaMelech, David appointed him to be in charge of the storehouse. So he returned and became, he returned in the Tshuva. And then after David died, in the days of Yeravam ben Nevat, which was 2 generations later, he already had returned to his evil ways again and become a Navi Sheker. Okay, so this person, Yonatan, is Moshe's grandson. He keeps going back and forth, right? He starts out... Yeah.
It does make sense that he was alive. See the time as David. Because יש 10 דורות, יש 10 דורות מאדם עד נוח, ואז מנוח עד אברהם, ומאברהם עד דוד יש גם בערך 10 דורות, מיעקב עד לדוד זה 10 דורות. ואז משה אמור להיות הדור הרביעי של לוי, שזה בעצם דור חמישי של יעקב, ואז זה דור שלישי או שני שלו, אז יכול להיות שהוא בערך היה אולי ממש זקן, אני לא יודע.
So I think what you're referring to is a chishur that comes up later in Masechet Bava Batra, which says 7 people saw the whole world. And the last person in that list is Pinchas, because he's Eliyahu, a Navi who never died. And we'll talk about that idea soon. That's where you're, like, that type of idea? Okay. But yes, according to this, you have to say he lived for hundreds of years, this person. In other words, he lived for a very long time. And we'll talk about that also.
How long?
Hundreds of years. No, the days Yeravam ben Nevat was 900 BC, something like that. So Moshe Rabbeinu's grandson must have been hundreds of years old at that point. Okay, if we look at a third version of this midrash in Yerushalmi Bachot, we'll do it quickly in the interest of time. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman v'Yonatan ben Gershom ben Menashe nun tluya. Okay, a hanging nun. Im zacha ben Moshe v'imla ben Menashe. That's what we said. So now it's asking the question, if he was, which nobody asked yet, if he was a priest for Avodah Zarah, so why did he merit to live for hundreds of years? In other words, that seems to be something you only get if you have a schut, right? So why did he get to live for so long if he was a Rasha? So the Midrash says, Amar lo al yad shehaya ino tzara b'avodah zarah shelo. It's kind of the same answer we saw in Bava Batra, that it's because he wasn't really worshipping Avodah Zarah. He just did it to make a living. How did that work? Right? Someone would come to him and they would bring, a bird or a goat or something to offer to Avodah Zarah. In other words, he would try, as the priest of that Avodah Zarah, he would in secret tell the people who came to sacrifice to Avodah Zarah, it's not real. Right? So that's why he merited to live for a long time. Even though he did something he wasn't allowed to do, he tried to subvert the Avodah Zarah from within. Okay? David HaMelech sent for him. You're the grandson of Moshe Rabbeinu, how can you do that? That's what we saw in Bava Batra. David HaMelech said to him, no way. אלא מחוץ מחל עבודה שהיא זרה לך, אבל תצטרך לבריות. So here it puts the discussion in the mouth of David HaMelech, whereas in the Gemara Bava Batra it was kind of like it was just a discussion that the Gemara had. Okay, וכיוון שראה דוד כך שהיה אוהב ממון, מה עשה? העמידו קומוס על תסבריות שלו. Okay, so he appointed him, over his money. הוא דכתיב שבואל בן גרשום ובמנשה נגיד על אוצרות. So that teaches me שבואל ששב אל אל בכל ליבו ובכל כוחו. That he returned to Hashem, נגיד על אוצרות שמיניה על תסברות שלו. And then, מטיב לרבי שמואל בר נחמן, וכתיב עד יום גלות הארץ. So it says at the end of the pasuk in Shoftim that Yonatan ben Gershom ben Menashe was a Kohen of Avodah Zarah ad yom glot haaretz, until they were exiled. So what does that mean? Amar lon, kevan shemet David amad Shlomo v'chilef sun keletin shelo. Shlomo HaMelech, after David died, he swapped out all the people in the palace, like all the advisors. He brought in new advisors. Chazal l'kikulo harishon. When that happened, in other words, he lost his job, Shvuel, so he returned to being Avodah Zarah. So that's why he was a Navi Sheker already in the days of Rav and Nevat, which was the next generation, because he was no longer working in the royal palace. Okay? So this is the tradition about Yonatan ben Gershom. Now let's try to understand what this Midrash is trying to do. Okay? So first I want to just bring, Kobe, you mentioned this, Baruch Shekivanta, so this idea of kind of attributing back previous generations is also found by Korach. It's the same idea. It says in the Tanchuma by Korach. So Korach is introduced, Vayikach Korach ben Yitzhak ben Kahab ben Levi, right? So the question is, ben Yitzhak ben Kahab ben Levi, v'lama lo k'tiv ben Aharon or ben Yisrael, right? Why does it stop at Levi and not go all the way back to Yaakov Avinu? So the Midrash says, Zeh Shem HaKatov, Bisdom al tavo nafshi v'gomer, excuse me, בסודם, אל תבוא נפשי, בסודם, אל תבוא נפשי, אלו המרגלים. בקלם על תחד כבודי זה קורח. אמר יעקב לפני הקדוש ברוך הוא, ריבונו של עולם, לא במרגלים ולא במחלוקתו של קורח, ייזכר שמי על אותם רשעים שעתידים להכעיס. That Yaakov Avinu asked Hashem not to have his name be attributed with the Rishayim that were destined to be descended from him. Yaakov asked that of Hashem. So he had Ruach HaKodesh, ostensibly, that he knew Korach would happen, so he said to Hashem, I don't want my name associated with those people. So that's why his name is not listed in Korach Zichus, right? When should it be? Only when they do good things. When does that happen? Korach's children, right? They were tzaddikim. They sang in the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, so it says Shneimar ben Tachat ben Asir ben Esav ben Korach ben Yisrael ben Kenha ben Levi ben Yisrael. That's in Divrei Yamim, but in the context of Korach's children, okay, because they were righteous. So we could say kind of a similar idea with Yonatan ben Gershom ben Menashe and Moshe, that it doesn't say Moshe, because Moshe didn't want his name associated with the wicked deeds of his descendants, just like Yaakov said here. I would add just like a small chidush to that, right? Here, this Midrash, Yaakov asks it of Hashem. We don't see Moshe asking of Hashem to remove his name from Yonatan. So why do you have the nun tluya? So there's the famous idea I have here in the halakha, the fish is achin adam shelo befanav, right? That you always benefit someone not in their presence. So it could be like Moshe Rabbeinu, even if he didn't ask, so the pasuk still did him a favor and b'shvil kvodo, like put the nun there in the name for Moshe. In any event, did want to kind of mention that. Okay, so let's now try to kind of piece this together. So Yonatan was Moshe's grandson, and the Gemara Bava Batra described L'olam yidbak adam b'tovim, a person should marry into a good family, because Moshe married into the family of Tzipora, and his descendants were wicked. But Aaron married Elisheva, and his descendants were righteous, Pinchas. Now, if you think about it, Moshe Rabbeinu, right, he himself was Ben Olamot. Right? He was even three worlds. Right? He was born Jewish, but he grew up in Egyptian, and then he ended up raising his family in Midian. He was between worlds, always. That was his identity. He was the outsider that, it's like a whole idea in and of itself. His son Gershom, right, and Eliezer, they're his two children, so we never see them taking a role in the Jewish leadership, right? In other words, who comes after Moshe is Yoshua. Like, what happens to his children? So, right. So first, exactly. So all the big Rabbanim's children go off the derech, of course, which is why the fact that Aaron's son and grandson, he was the Kohen Gadol, the fact that they stayed in the lineage is so interesting. What was the difference between them? Because what happened, Moshe's, right, so it's the Yichus, but it's also that Moshe sent Gershon and Eliezer In other words, there's a midrash which we're not going to do here, but it's a fascinating midrash that says Moshe made a deal with Yitro when he married Tzipporah that the first child that he had would be for Avodah Zarah, and that Gershom was actually raised as an Ovid of Avodah Zarah, because at the time Yitro was a Kohen for Avodah Zarah. And then the whole story where they're going down to the hotel and then Tzipporah takes the Brit Milah, that's because Gershom didn't have a Brit Milah because he was dedicated to Avodah Zarah. And that was kind of his sanctification process, that he became a Jew in that. There's a whole midrash on that. We hear that Gershom and Eliezer, they come visit with Moshe in the Midbar, with Yitro, right? It says Yitro, right, he comes to visit Achar Shiluchea v'shtei banea. They weren't there for Yetziat Mitzrayim, they weren't there for the Makot, they weren't there for Kriyat Yam Suf. Where were they? Yeah. Where were they?
But what that means is, what that translates into is they don't see any miracles. They just see the disaster in the desert when everyone's complaining.
Right, so they were missing the whole Geulah. They were sent home. Moshe sent them away. They weren't there. They were in Midian with their mom, under the influence of Tzipporah.
But Moshe goes back with Tzipporah and the kids. So at what point, during the Makos, he sends them back, like while he's trying to get the Jews out.
Yes.
He sends them back to Midian.
Yeah.
They miss everything.
Yeah, the Midrash says it explicitly, but the Psukim imply it because they say that she was sent away. In other words, that they weren't there for it, right? So they missed all the Makot. They're in Midian, in the influence of Midian. Then they come to the desert, and then they leave again. No, it says Yitro leaves, and so they leave again because they're not there. They're part of Bnei Yisrael, but they're not part of Bnei Yisrael. Their father is, the rabbi. They have no connection to him. He's doing the Lord's work, and so Gershom and Eliezer, they don't know what their place is. No, they're really caught between these worlds of like Midian, and they're raised by their mother, and their mother is not Jewish, and all that. So if you think about it, the story that the Midrash is telling about Yonatan, who's Gershom's son, is the ramification of that, right? If you choose to raise your family or your children are raised in an environment where they don't have a clear set of values, a clear kind of this is who you are, this is your arachim, but rather, sometimes you're with the Jewish people, sometimes you're not with the Jewish people, sometimes you're sent, sometimes you're not sent, sometimes you're avodah zarah, sometimes you have brit milah, so the heritage of Gershom, the legacy of Gershom is Yonatan. He keeps going back and forth, right? For him, he doesn't know what's true because he doesn't have a clear set of values. So for him, it's just advantageous. It's like transactional, like lehavdil, right? It's a transactional foreign policy. It's not based on any ideology. That if it works for me, I'll be a kohen for avodah zarah. If it doesn't work for me, then I'll go be in the Beit HaMikdash. And if that doesn't work for me, I'll go be a Navi Sheker. In other words, he doesn't have any true belief system because he was raised in a home and an environment where it was always being switched up. There was no consistency to it. And that's what the Gemara is saying when it says, Lo midbak adam batovim. And that's the message of Yonatan Gershom. It's a tragic kind of story that's what happens to Moshe and his children. But Aaron married Elisheva, raised his kids. And despite what happened to Nadav and Avihu, in other words, you'd think Elazar Tamar, after what happened to Nadav and Avihu, would say, yeah, I'm done. But they kept it going. Pinchas kept it going. They kept the Kuna Gdola because Aaron didn't have this whole story. He had a clear sense of what his mission was in the world. Okay? So to take that one step further, I want to go back to what we alluded to before about Pinchas and Eliyahu. Okay? If you look in Seder Olam Rabbah, so Seder Olam Rabbah, actually we can skip this. If there's time, we can skip that. Really, let's go to Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. Right, it says Pinchas, who is Aaron's grandson, right? Rabbi Eliezer Omer Kra Shemo Shel Pinchas B'Shmo Eliyahu. This is the famous idea that we know that Pinchas and Eliyahu were the same person. Eliyahu is a Chul HaTov. What?
Famous ideas.
What?
Lots of famous ideas.
Lots of famous ideas. מתושבי גלעד, שעשה ישראל תשובה על ידו בהר גלעד. Right, so Eliyahu brought Bnei Yisrael back to do tshuva on Har Gilad. Now, when did that happen? What's the story that it's referencing here? Right, on Har Eliyahu. What did he say to Bnei Yisrael? You remember?
This is with Baal?
This with Baal. What does he say to Bnei Yisrael? Ad matay atem poschim ashtei seifim, right? Which means, how long are you going to go back and forth? If you're going to be with Hashem, im la Elokim yichu elav, im la Baal yichu elav. Stop playing both. Be consistent. Have a set of values. Choose one path. Don't keep going back and forth between them. V'no lo anu lo davar. Right?
From the very beginning of even Bnei Yaakov were like that.
Right.
And the whole everything in the middle goes back and forth, back and forth.
Of course.
But it's a funny way to look at it to say, pick a side, because the Dan Chafschus way of looking at it is, we have a moral compass to do right. People go like you have Tavis, like well, which I think there's much who don't have a say, who don't understand the type nowadays, but like they went to do it. This was like the straight and narrow, and you go for that. Like he's like saying, "Oh, you've got to pick a side," but you could also look at it as like they know what's right, but sometimes they would go off, and then like and then return. It's not like you can't. He's like no, if you're going to go Sefer forever.
Saying he says it's binary. There's no
there's no
middle ground.
Doing a verse like
So I would argue you're saying
sounds to me like he's being very shelf. Like it's not. There's no shuvah. You can't like do it and then come out.
right. So this is exactly the point I'm trying to argue. So who are you saying Bnei Israel is like? In the story I'm trying to build here, like exactly what you said is who I just described. That is Yonatan, right? Yonatan is the one who sometimes he goes here, sometimes he goes there. He has some moral compass, as is clear, right? He says, I have some idea that I need to, make an honest living, right? He's trying to do the right thing, but he gets led in the wrong direction, and then he comes, and then he goes, and he's Navi Sheker and a Navi Emet. That is Yonatan. But who is Eliyahu? Who is Eliyahu? Pinchas, right? They're second cousins. What?
He was a Kanai. He didn't have.
He was a Kanai, right? Exactly.
The right way or the highway.
Right. Pinchas and Yonatan represent the worldviews of their grandfathers. Okay? That Moshe and Aaron. Moshe is Emes. Emes is you're either LaHashem or you're to Baal, and that very strict approach led to his children who not being able to maintain that. They didn't have the option to do either or, and they were the rabbi's kids, as you said. So they keep flip flopping because they don't know what's right. They can't live up to Moshe's ideal. Aaron Kohen, right? Ohev Shalom, Rodef Shalom, but with a consistent set of values. So his grandson Pinchas is the one who says you have to have this is who you are. You're an Oved Hashem. That's it, right? They each take the traits of their grandfathers, and that's what the Gemara means when it says. So now the chidush I want to say at the very end is, okay, so when Eliyahu says on Har Carmel, how long are you going to go back and forth? Are you going to be here or are you going to be there? So if Eliyahu was Pinchas, so that means that Pinchas / Eliyahu lived for a very long time, right? Eliyahu lived already in the days of Bayit Rishon.
Right?
What?
He doesn't die.
He doesn't die. But saying he's Pinchas means that he was born hundreds of years earlier.
And at this point he was still
Meaning, in the story, he's Eliyahu, and then after the story, he ends up going up to Shemaim. But if you say he was Pinchas, he was already alive for hundreds of years when he's on Har Carmel, right? If he's Pinchas,
Meaning if you don't kill Jews,
right? So
you keep the bit.
now, why does the Midrash say that he is Pinchas? Aside from the fact they're both zealots, because there's also a story at the end of Sefer Shoftim, a story of Pilegesh Begiva, right? The story of the Pilegesh, she gets cut up. It's the whole story of the civil war. Where it mentions there that Pinchas was the Kohen Gadol. Okay? Now that's at the end of Sefer Shoftim. So just like we said, if Yehonatan is at the end of Sefer Shoftim, he's mentioned, and he's Moshe's grandson, that means he lived hundreds of years. So same thing you have to say about Pinchas, who's mentioned at the end of Sefer Shoftim, that he lives hundreds of years. And if he's already living hundreds of years from the Midbar to the end of Sefer Shoftim, I'll just extend it, says the Medrash. I'll extend it to the days of Eliyahu, which is another few hundred years.
Is it a problem that I thought the whole Torah everyone in the desert had to die before they went to Sarna?
That's a good question. Never thought
Maybe
about
not
that.
maybe not
Why
the
didn't Pinchas have to?
Maybe not Levium.
It could be Pinchas was younger than 20 when the Gezerah was done.
But they weren't in.
What
They
are we
weren't.
talking about?
Yeah, they didn't have a
Representative in the
representative.
12
They didn't have a
spies.
spy.
Could be they got to get out of jail.
He was before he was even.
No, but Hashem says everyone's going to die as of 20.
Yeah, but it could be that kind of Levium got a
We're
free
exempted?
pass.
Could be. I never heard that idea.
Because
But
they didn't sin with Egel Azov, right?
right. Interesting. I don't know. I mean, Elazar also survives. So, and he was definitely over 20.
Why?
Pinchas' father.
לא,
לא, בשבט לוי was
לא
different.
בשבט לוי, בשבט לוי לא.
שבט לוי לא מתו במדבר?
שבט לוי זה היחיד שאמר...
פרשה שלנו עכשיו.
מה?
במדבר. הם נמנו לבד.
לא, בסדר, אבל אחרי חטא המרגלים, שכל הדור ההוא מתו, זה לא כלל שבט לוי? זה...
Well, theoretically, again,
לא,
you
הכי
didn't have
גדול
representative
היה
amongst the
40.
12 spies.
הכי
so
גדול
that's
היה
number
40.
one.
דורש עיון.
I'm sorry, Jeff.
כן,
And-
No? It's a good question.
And that's only by the men's
שיש
end
שם לא
of
מקום.
the, that's only by the men's end of the equation. Because we
No,
also
of course.
remember
Right, yeah, yeah.
Silch
Possible that
Matashir.
only Pinchas could have
Yeah,
been
of course.
he
According
doesn't
to-
die.
הוא אומר, למה בני לוי נמלאו לבד? ככה, אומרים, ראובן ככה, שמעון ככה, לוי נמלאו
כן.
מאוחדת. זאת אומרת, כי כל מי שנגזר עליו מבין 20 ומעלה ימות במדבר, אז בני לוי לא נמלאו איתם. אז הם לא חלק מהגזרה.
אוקיי.
ככה שכותב.
אז רש"י אומר את זה מפורש, זה לא הכרתי. יופי.
אנחנו נשאל את הרב מדן ונראה מה הוא יכריע.
Because if not, I would say maybe he
Yeah,
specifically
he
got
may
a
have been
free
young.
pass 'cause
Yeah.
No, I'm saying he doesn't die. Like it could be Pinchas himself got a
Right.
free pass because he's
His father was Elazar, right?
Yeah.
Aaron's son.
yeah.
So he survives
Why?
because he's in Sefer Yoshua. He's the Kohen Gadol
It's for sure the same one.
in Eretz Yisrael. Yeah, and he must have been over 20.
Probably is that the Levium got a free pass.
All right. All right. If Rashi says it, I never heard that idea. It's very interesting.
Well, the whole thing of the lineage is interesting because also you see later Eli and his sons, Hofni and Pinchas, not the same Pinchas.
Right.
And what they were involved in later on, especially when you jump to Beit Sheni. This is the whole big deal. The whole big deal of the connection between is the lineage worth it?
נכון.
Is with a very famous story between Shmaya and Avtalion and the Kohen Gadol who gets out of Kodesh Kodeshei Kodeshim and Yom Kippur. The people decide to ditch him and join Shmaya and Avtalion. Their lineage was Nebuzaradan Sartabachim.
Right.
So you think of the whole concept of what is lineage something eventually you need to revere is a question as to itself. Another interesting thing, also mentioning Yerovam ben Nevat was mentioned earlier. What was his lineage? In other words, he comes to start something new, and yet in the Midrash he says that Hashem shows up in his dream and says to him, if you follow the footsteps of David Avdi, then you, me, and Ben Yishai walk together in Gan Eden.
Right.
Okay? But then it was important to him to ask who's going to lead.
Right.
And then, okay, if not, then no. In other words, so you can say, speaking of, because Yerovam ben Nevat was from Shevet Ephraim. In other words, by saying this, by saying that Nitla Menashe, because Yaakov chose whom? He put his hands over, his right hand over Ephraim,
Right.
which was the youngest. In other words, Menashe was the...
You're saying it's not Menashe the Melech Yehuda, but Menashe
Exactly,
the
so
son
it's
of
not
Yaakov.
revered. Another thing, Yoshua was mentioned here also.
Yeah.
Who did he marry?
Rachel. Yeah. Right.
Okay?
Sure.
So you think of, do you have any descendants at all, Yoshua? Is that something that
Maybe Yosh says it. I don't remember.
It's just another little point, another little question that needs to be asked. And speaking of, and connecting all the dots together, speaking of Rachav, by the way, and mentioning Avodah Zarah, and interesting that's brought up in the Yerushalmi, is the whole Christian claim. The Christian claim says, because, the quote-unquote, the lineage
Okay.
that goes back to David HaMelech, the claim is that both, according to them, his mother is from the descendant of David HaMelech.
Right.
But the claim is that there's another lineage of his supposed father.
Right.
Also, what is it based on? It's based on the claim that Boaz was a descendant of Rachav, and she didn't marry Yoshua.
Okay.
That's their claim.
Okay.
So it's just I'm pointing that little game out. Speaking of, and understanding what's between the lines here.
Very good.
So speaking of the connection to Avodah Zarah and
Very good.
lineage.
Excellent.
AI is pretty confident about the Levium not dying.
Who didn't die?
It brings a bunch of sources, but it's
I said it. Rashi says it.
Who didn't die?
Yeah, he said Rashi.
could be, but it doesn't know.
Who wasn't
It
die?
says that specifically people who die are people counted in the census.
Okay. Excellent.
The Levium will count separately.
Okay. I never heard it, but it's obvious now in hindsight. It must be. Okay. I just always assume because Hashem says over and over again, Levad mi Yoshua ben Nun Kalev ben Yefuneh, or everyone else is going to die. Okay, excellent. Thank you. I wanted to make one more connection and take this even further. I know we're already at 40 minutes, but give me another 5 minutes or so. The Midrash said Yonatan, Moshe's grandson, lived all the way from, Moshe's lifetime until the days of this Navi Sheker, which was Yoram ben Nevat. So I want to argue, if he's already lived for hundreds of years, we can say Yonatan could lived another 80 or so years on top of that, which would put him in the time of Eliyahu Navi. And what that would mean is that Eliyahu Navi, who was Pinchas, Aaron's grandson, and Yonatan, who was Moshe's grandson, both lived for hundreds of years, because the Midrash says they both lived for hundreds of years, and they were both alive in the days of Bayit Rishon. That the Midrashim say.
Second cousins.
And they were second cousins. They were second cousins. They're both hundreds of years old. That's what the Midrash says, because they're both mentioned at the end of Sefer Shoftim. And what I want to argue is what we said earlier, when and this is what Shimon was mentioning as well. When Eliyahu says on Har Carmel, first of all he says to Hashem, "Ani notarti levadi," right? I'm the only one left who worships Hashem, right? That's what the Eliyahu says. When he says at Har Carmel, "Ad matai etem poschim al shtei seifim, im laHashem l'chuelav, im ban l'chuelav," so who does his musar penetrate to the heart to? Is his second cousin Yonatan, who's been alive for hundreds of years also. Yonatan was in Malchut Yisrael. Yerom Nevat was in Malchut Yisrael. So I will claim with my midrashic license that Yonatan was there at Har Carmel, like the rest of Bnei Yisrael, and he saw his second cousin.
That was pretty old. Do you think he made it all the way up to the top?
He was one of
Was
the.
that-
It was
what?
like a
Sorry.
Bamot Nevi'im.
Well, I can't hear you. Yonatan hears his second cousin Eliyahu, Pinchas, right? Telling Bnei Israel, you have to pick a side. You have to stop living on one side or the other side, oscillating back and forth. It's either Avodah Zarah or Hashem. And Yonatan says, I've spent my whole life being a priest for Avodah Zarah, working in the Beit HaMikdash for David HaMelech, being a Navi Sheker, being a Navi Emet. I have not been able to find my place. I would argue that that Eliyahu's message strikes straight to the heart of his second cousin Yonatan. The two of them were these two people who were 700-800 years old in that moment, and they represented these two worldviews: the worldview of Moshe and the worldview of Aaron, carrying all the way through to the days of Bayit Rishon. Do you have a clear set of values that you pass on to your children, or do you say that I isolate back and forth and that I'm more opportunistic? And to conclude, there's a Gemara in Sanhedrin here. There's a story even after Eliyahu. There's a story of his student Elisha. When Elisha dies, there's a really strange story in the Tanakh where it says Elisha dies, he's buried, and then at one point there's a group of people who are just traveling, and they're people who want to bury somebody, okay? And then these robbers or this group comes by, and they're scared of this group who's coming by. So the person that they were going to bury, they just kind of throw his bones into a ditch because they don't get the chance to bury him properly because they're afraid of this group passing by. The bones of this person who was being buried roll until they touch the bones of Elisha, the prophet, and then the bones of that body revive and come back to life. There's Tchiyat HaMetim. Okay, that's a story in the Tanakh. So Elisha revives someone after he himself has died. Okay.
Second time, by the way.
Sukim. It's not a midrash. What?
Second time. It was with Elisha, no?
Yeah.
Yafe, good. So Gemara Sanhedrin, excellent. How do we know that you're not supposed to bury a rasha with a tzaddik in the same plot? It says, "Vayim kovrim ish, v'nei ru'u takdud v'yashlichu ta'ish bekever Elisha, v'yaga ish ba'atzmot Elisha v'yichi v'yakom al ragav." This person touched Elisha's bones and he got up and he walked around. He's like, what happened? I'm back to life. So from here we learn that you don't bury a rasha. Right. How did I get here? Right? He was dead and then he's back to life. So from here, Rav Chanina understands that you don't bury a tzaddik next to a rasha. Meaning, what's the drasha? This person wasn't revived due to his own merit, but because Elisha was a tzaddik, and you're not allowed to bury a tzaddik next to a rasha. So this random person's bones end up next to Elisha's bones. You're not allowed to have a rasha next to tzaddik. So there was no choice but for him to be revived and to walk away.
Somewhere else.
Yeah, to walk away. Yeah, because he couldn't be buried there. Yeah. Okay. So now Amalei Rav Papa, but Rav Papa says, why do you say that that's what's happening here? And Elisha asks Eliyahu before Eliyahu goes up to Shamayim. Elisha says to him, I want pishtaim of your ruach. I want double what you have. Right? And Eliyahu says to him, if you see me go up in a whirlwind to the Shamayim, that means you'll get your request. And Elisha saw it. So that means he got double what Eliyahu had. So he says, what does that mean? So what does that mean that he got double? Okay, so he's going to say... מה?
צריך לחיות שתיים.
בדיוק, שהוא צריך לחיות שתי מתים, exactly. Because Eliyahu revived a child, and Elisha revived a child. But if Elisha did double what Eliyahu did, he had to revive two people. So maybe the second person that was revived was a fulfillment of Elisha getting pishtayim of Eliyahu. And if that's the case, I can't learn anything about En Kovrin Rasha Etz Tzadik from that story. So then he answers it. So then Rav Papa answers, Rav Acha Bar Chanina answers it. Amar le'i hachi hainu detani al raglav amad uleveito lo alach. Right? If that were so what should it have said? It says, what happens? Vaychi vayakom al raglav. He's revived and he stands up on his feet. So he says that implies that, and then he died again right away. In other words, he was revived, just enough for him to walk away from Elisha's body, and he fell back and he died again. If it was to fulfill the Pishnaim of Eliyahu, then he should have been revived, Tchiat HaMetim proper, and survived. The fact that he died again right away, he didn't get to go to his house. So he says that teaches what I said. But according to Rav Papa, where do I see according to him then, so then where do I see the Pishnaim? If it's not Tchiat HaMetim, because he says the second one was to teach me En Kovin Hashesh Tzadik, so where do we see Pishnaim by Elisha? So it says, Amar le Rabbi Yochanan sheripet tzarad Naaman shishkula. That at one point Elisha heals Naaman from tzarat. And healing someone from tzarat, right, so it's as though he did a second Tchiat HaMetim when he healed Naaman, okay? So why am I bringing this story? Because look at Rashi, we didn't even discuss who is this person, right? So clearly Rav Acha assumes he's a Rasha, because he says, En Kovin Rasha is Tzadik. We don't know who he is. So Rashi says, Oto Anikbar, Navi Sheker Haya. That person whose bones touched Elisha's body and was revived was the Navi Sheker. Asher Shivet Ido Lechov Lishop Beveit El V'Ne'ena Shido Yado Ve'mito Ari. וכשמת לך הימים קברו אצל אלישע ולא הוכשר את המקום שקבר אותו והחיו. Because he was a Navi Sheker, he was not allowed to be buried next to Elisha. Now, who was that Navi Sheker according to the Gemara in the Yerushalmi? It was Yonatan. So what does that mean? That means not only did Pinchas and Yonatan, the grandchildren of Moshe and Aaron, each live through the Kufat HaShoftim, each live through the time of David HaMelech, and live all the way to the times of Eliyahu, to the time of Yerav and Nevat, to the time of Achav, as Eliyahu and then as Yonatan. But they also both never died. Or I'll put it differently. Eliyahu never died, and Yonatan, after he died, he was brought back Tchiat HaMetim from the dead. So the two of them lived on forever, because he was revived from the dead and Eliyahu never died. So mamash, these two figures, Moshe and Aaron, the Midrash is representing that their legacies, Moshe and Aaron's legacies, are la'ad, la'netzach, because both of their grandsons, well, he was revived according to this story.
So he's alive now?
It doesn't say, but the point is that him coming back to life, and perhaps you could say it was the ultimate redemption also for Yonatan. That he did a tshuva and mita mechaperet or whatever, and then he ended up being, finally he was reconciled to Hashem. We see this parallel between the second cousins, Yonatan and Pinchas, from the days of the Midbar all the way through to the days of Eliyahu, Elisha, and beyond. That's what I want to say.
שכוייך. הסוף. The end.
Yeah, Yonatan comes on Purim.
That's the end of the story. That's the end of the story, okay? Bye. The end of the story.